Good morning, good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to LeadVR session 4. Today we're talking about management, conflict, productivity, and performance. Our presenters are David Leon from Virginia DARS and Sharina Sewell, who is also from Virginia DARS, who is presenting by recording. In the meantime, before we get off into all of that, we're going to talk about the agenda for today, which includes a discussion of our homework and our SWOT. And then we'll get into the presentations on performance management and contract negotiations. There's a case study that will be a part of the activity. We'll go into a discussion of performance and conflict management, and then another breakout on conflict management in your DISC behavioral assessment. Looking forward to that. David is going to share with us a growth mindset and authentic leadership, as well as a discussion of delegation, accountability, and morale. Those are great topics, very much needed in this current environment in VR. But before we get there, before we start our discussion, just want to send a reminder to you. Today, we are providing CRC credit for today and all of the LeadVR sessions. Because of that, we are required to do a couple of things. That is to take attendance. We'd like to know you're here and that you're engaged. And how can we know that you're engaged? Your cameras are on. So we encourage you and ask you to please turn your cameras on so that we know that you're present and engaged, so that we can limit our desire to multitask. And although we've been trained as supervisors and managers that we have to do 3 things at once, the research also shows it's not great when we do 3 things at once and we're not good at it. So we ask you to be fully present, fully here, cameras on, limit your other activities, and just be here for LeadVR. Your professional development is a priority for us, and we hope that it's a priority for you. And so part of our discussion is today addressing conflict in the workplace. So if you feel like in your workplace you haven't been given the power to make your professional development a priority, perhaps today's discussion will give you the tools and resources to address that. But it first has to come from you. This has to be a priority for you, for your own professional development. And so we ask that you make it that by turning on your cameras and being fully present, fully engaged. That supports our ability to be able to give you CRC credit, as well as the other activities of LeadVR, which include you participating and sharing your homework assignments. I'm going to go ahead and find it on my screen. I know that this last session last month with Dr. Susan and Dr. Dana was on the ABCs of inclusion. It was a great discussion all about the power of self-awareness. And so we had a lot of reflection questions around self-awareness. And part of, go ahead and start my screen share. So part of that discussion on the ABCs of inclusion included you in your assignment thinking deeply about your identities. What identities do you inhabit? And then what are your beliefs about your leadership styles, your current occupation, your work relationships, and how your different identities impact these beliefs? And then to think about the identities that you don't inhabit and how those identities and associated experiences influence your values, your beliefs, and your behaviors with your colleagues. So that's a deep reflection activity. There is some information about misconceptions about your DISC leadership styles, how others may presume we are based upon our behaviors. And then the second reflection activity was to document how you prefer to communicate, then to identify your leadership and communication style to others and find out how they prefer to communicate. This is an important activity, especially if you're thinking about how do you manage your manager? How do you lead from behind? Well, how can you be effective in managing up or leading from behind if we don't know the communication styles of the people who are our supervisors or our managers? So after you identify it to your manager, after you identify it to the people you lead, find out their leadership style, find out how they prefer to communicate, and then to document their responses. How do you get that information? You ask. And then what can you do to adapt your communication style to better accommodate your team? That was the second part of the homework. The third part of the homework was to work within your team to take the information that was shared in session 2 about the SWOT and to begin discussing and planning how you're going to work that out within your team. So I wanted to start there with the SWOT and get your questions, find out what additional information you may need to be effective within your faculty group, within your team, your small group cohort that you share your coaching sessions with. What questions do you have about the SWOT and how you should be proceeding? Any questions about the SWOT?
Robin, I know in our group there were questions about how individuals from different states could work together, and there were questions about how much faculty would be involved in each step of that SWOT. And what I had said is that I would be there to review and ask questions and clarifying items as things were brought to the forefront, and that there were multiple ways of choosing to go at that SWOT depending on what that group felt was the need, whether it would be a presentation that involved the individual strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of each of the states, or one core issue that resonated and felt like something everyone should work on.
Thank you, David. Certainly agree the faculty are there for coaching, for support, but this is primarily a project for you in your cohort to work through. If you have more than one state in your small group, it's totally possible to work together across your agencies and to do the organizational environmental scan. The great thing about the SWOT is that it gives you the opportunity to align what you consider to be priorities across those different agencies or even within your one agency.
So, Robin, I think some other opportunities with the SWOT, and I think I shared this with folks in my group, is that, you know, it gives you an opportunity to promote yourself within the agency, get more exposure within the agency. And it also gives you an opportunity to be a catalyst for change in your agency in terms of, you know, what you choose as your project and you know, how you can help the agency improve better customer services, a better working environment, you know, address issues, for example, of recruitment and retention ideas. And, you know, there's a lot of information out there with the technical assistance centers that can be resourced. And, looking what other agencies are doing. There are several different agencies represented in this cohort, and not only reaching out to maybe people in your group, but people across the whole cohort as to what they may be doing about a certain issue or issues in their agency.
Thank you, John. Yes, absolutely. An opportunity to make change happen in your organization. One of the goals or the activities for your presentation, your graduation, in that last session, when you'll present your findings, we're going to invite your leadership to come and hear the presentation. And if they're not able to be there, we encourage you and will support you to do these presentations internally to your leadership team. There have been previous participants in LeadVR who have taken their presentations, their findings, and they've gone on to share them nationally and other conferences. So consider this a great opportunity to make change happen, not only in your organization, but to also to share your findings across a broader spectrum. We would like to see that you align it to the current VR priorities, which are the focus on outreach and then the retention and recruitment, as well as streamlining VR processes. And as John has mentioned, there are lots of resources, reports, research out there to support you in your efforts. And we'll be sharing those resources as well. I'll put some links on the website for you to access that will help you as you do this environmental scan. The best thing on a SWOT, the easiest way to approach it is to just get started. Consider that first session when you get together to talk about what are the strengths of our organization or across our organizations. Consider it a big brainstorming session. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are the external opportunities and external threats? Just consider it a huge brainstorming session. All ideas are valid. All ideas are on the table. Write them down. And then if you follow the steps, after that, you'll begin to align those strengths to your threats, or how do you take your strengths to overcome your threats, and so on and so forth. So the resources have been given or shared with you to help you go through those steps of doing the SWOT. But the best way to approach it is to approach it. Just do it. Get together and consider it just a big brainstorming session. Other questions, comments? You all are in a very unique position, being in mid-level management. You know what's happening with your managers. You also are very connected with frontline staff, often doing the caseloads yourself. So you know very much the needs and resources of your agencies. But often at your level, your voices may go unheard. So consider again this opportunity for the SWOT to really make change happen in your organization. Let's go back to the homework. Any questions or comments, or what did you find in your homework submission? Anyone want to share?
Robin, you may want to say a little more about the first question about the identities.
Okay.
Because I think there was some confusion in my group as to whether that was just personal identities or work identities or both.
Okay, thank you, John. Reflection activity 1 said, what identities do you inhabit? And for discussion, how do your identities impact your relationship with peers? What needs to be changed to be fully yourself? What needs to be changed? There probably should be like in your work environment. So for identities, I'm not sure if anyone answered this or submitted their homework and want to share their answers there. But for me, what identities do I inhabit? My identities are my identities, whether I'm at work or at home, right? So I am a Black female, cisgender, Christian, leader, educator, mother, wife, sister, auntie, friend. I am a reader, a researcher, a somewhat of an exercise junkie, outdoor lover, pet lover. All of these things make up my identity. Community engagement leader. And so how do my identities impact my relationship with my peers? I am strongly committed to ensuring that people in the workplace, people that I meet, have a sense of belonging and inclusion. So with my work and how I show up, I tend to, I want to relate to people. I want to get to know people. I want to understand people's stories. So that impacts my relationship with my peers. What needs to be changed for me to be fully myself, to me to fully show all of my different identities and not hold back on any part of it? Well, for me personally, thinking about that, the social distance theory that Susan shared in the last session, the closer I am to you, the closer I am in getting to know your identities and how they connect or the same to my identities, I'm more likely to share fully who I am. So spending time with people, and whether it's virtually or in person, getting to know other people's stories are all important to me. For me to be fully myself, for you to know me fully as myself, I just need to spend time with you. I need to have that opportunity. So what I need to change is not seclude myself and go off in my own little dungeon, my own little area, and close the door and not engage with people, because that's the easy way for me as a DI in DISC, because I'm goal oriented and I want to get things done and often think I can do it better myself. Then I need to break out of that habit and really take risks and get to know people and stop to ask questions, and to relate to people. So that's how I would answer that question. Who else would share? Maybe another faculty will share. I'll pick on David.
Okay. Wow. Robin, I can't think of that many identities at once, but I identify as a white Jewish male, father, husband, strong supporter of the community, volunteer for a low power radio station and a philanthropic board, avid outdoor person, love animals, and walk my 3 large dogs 5 to 6 miles a day. It's important to be active in the city and community, big reader. It's important to be engaged in the arts and critical thinking. And I think the areas, and I try to challenge myself with different projects each year. This year, my big goal was that the things I choose to consume in terms of reading and arts are all from groups that are not who I identify with. So right now that includes me reading The Book of Delights by Ross Gay, and at the same time, The Witches Are Coming by a female who identifies as a feminist. And the next book I'm about to start is by a Native American writer. So those are the kind of things that I hope will lead to a broader perspective and ability to think more clearly or better interact with groups and understand their perspectives.
Thank you, David. What about you, Veronica?
I somehow knew you were coming to me, so I pulled my homework up. Hello, everyone. Veronica Jackson. My identities are I'm a Black woman, capital B Black, cisgender, heterosexual wife, daughter, sister, niece, cousin, aunt, friend, first generation college student, middle class, business owner, life coach, think partner. That's who I am. In the DISC assessment, my leadership style is C. I need all of the information, all of the facts and figures. The more stuff you can throw at me about your vision for a project, the better. However, when you just tell me we're going to go somewhere and don't give me details, it gives me hives. So yes, that's me. I'm really passionate about leadership development, but I'm also just excited about a world in which people feel safe enough to show up as their full self. I was telling David when we got on super early, because I was on super early again, C-Style, but I went to see Lizzo this weekend for the second time. And the best part was the diversity in the room. There were so many people on my row. There were people who were probably in their 60s, and there was a young lady that, bless her heart, she probably was about 17, standing beside me, filming the whole thing. And I just know she has a full 2-hour-long video with me singing full voice during the whole concert. And when I look back at the pictures my husband took of me, I was like, this poor baby, she was trying to capture it all. And in her capturing it, she got my background vocals. So, but I do love seeing people just free to show up as their full self, however that full self is. And if you want to see that on display, go to a Lizzo concert, because there were all people, all kinds of people, all colors, all shapes, all sizes, and they showed up, if you know what that means. And so other things about me, I have a hard time with not knowing the answers. Last week on our diversity and inclusive leadership training, I burst into tears for 2 hours with Robin and the other facilitators, because I don't know everything about accessibility. So when I don't know everything, I melt into the earth and need someone to help build me back up. And thankfully, I work with people who do just that. So that's it about me.
Thank you, Veronica. So I have 2 more faculty I'm going to pick on. That's going to be John Conley next, and then Susan.
But I would defer to Susan as. No,
I'm
thank
coming back
you.
to you either way.
No, that's fine. Dog lover, dog owner, consultant leader, connector, trying to connect people to accomplish things and connect people with resources, facilitator, program development person and educator for CSAVR and programs we put on. Father, and this will be a surprise to you, grandfather, husband, parent. Let me see, you got such a good list, Robin. Reader, military historian, military collector, Christian white male. So those are some of my identities.
Thank you, John. And anything else you want to add on how your identities impact your relationship with your peers?
Well, hopefully my, experience in the field, for example, that goes back to 1980 is I can, help folks think of ways to deal with problems, or at least share with them things that have been tried and didn't work, so they can, maybe build upon that as they look forward. Always again try and be a connector. Also trying to give people opportunities. We're looking for people, for example, in CSAVR, new directors who may not have had much exposure within the organization, to give them opportunities to present, so they become more well-known in terms of their talents and abilities within the organization. So those are some of my responses to your question.
Love it. Thank you, John. And I just want to piggyback on that. I mean, you really are a connector and a resource sharer, a great resource for me in particular. I know if I ever need or have an idea, I could always come to John, and he's going to help me dissect and see, understand the bigger picture. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. That was very kind.
Susan, what are your identities?
Good morning, everyone. So my identity. So, I mean, to bring it back to what we were talking about during the last session, we're really talking about, you all did the salient circles activity with your partners, right? Your accountability partners. And so we were talking about the different identities that we hold and how, different, even among all of the identities, even listed by my co-faculty members, I mean, certain ones are going to be more important in certain situations. So depending on the situation, some of them can be more or less important. But overall, in general, Black, female, cisgender, thinking about different identities that I had listed. Those are generally the ones that you can see. And then the more hidden ones, Marvel nerd, right? I will sit there and watch YouTube nerd breakdowns of Marvel comics and movies. People often don't expect that, but Team Iron Man, there's a huge fight because all of my family is Team Captain America, but I am Team Iron Man, the lone holdout. And let's see, researcher, wife, mother, aunt, friend, sister, all of the things. There's a lot of overlap between what I heard my colleagues mention and what I know about myself. And so taking it back to what Robin was talking about, social distance, that's really an opportunity to align yourself. So the more that you get to know each other, because I didn't know some of these things, even though I had been working with some of them, I didn't know, areas in which we aligned. And so thinking about like social distance theory and how that can work in terms of your colleagues and your work relationships and your consumers as well. Just getting to know a little bit about them, you can find those areas of similarity. Oh, well, we're both parents. So maybe you can talk about, some of the struggles of parenthood, of which there are many, right? And some of the great moments, and that can be a space where you align, even if you are very different on different ends of that social distance spectrum. So really using that opportunity to get to know people and get to know some of the roles that they play in their life and some of the identities that they hold will offer you more of a space to try to get to know them and bring you closer on that spectrum of distance, right? So I'm trying to think. That's how it affects me at work. I couldn't remember the other question. Oh, what would have to change if you wanted to bring your full self? You know, right now I'm in a pretty good place. I'm in a pretty good place with that. I enjoy my work, and with my colleagues here where I'm at now, I do feel that I can bring my full self to work. That has not always been the case. There have been places where I felt that I needed to code switch, or I needed to present a certain version of myself in order to get along with people, in order to, you know, be seen as a productive person or a leader or a good colleague. And some of you may also feel that way. And it's exhausting. It truly is. It's very tiring to have to constantly feel like you're wearing a mask. And it leads to attrition. So for consumers and for the people that you work with, when you feel like you don't belong, or you feel like this isn't the place for you, or everything is too different, it can lead to people leaving. And so, you know, getting to know people, taking that time, as Robin mentioned, is really going to be a big step in the right direction for combating some of that. So.
Thank you, Susan. I really appreciate you all sharing. Anyone else want to share on their identities or any other portion of the homework?
This is Brandy. I can go.
Go ahead.
Okay. So my inhabits, I put female, biracial, middle class, family oriented, education, adaptive, introverted. I've noticed as I have become older, my circle has gotten smaller. So I am more introverted at this age. And I put, I did personality, but I put well-rounded, positive, respectful, and I am outspoken. And so when it comes to my peers, I think I was a SI style. I'm very positive. I'm very outgoing to those that are around me, but I have to be comfortable for individuals to see that side of me. And I know that may seem like wearing a mask, like Miss Susan had just stated, but that's just how my personality is. Let's see, what was the last question?
So what needs to be changed to be fully yourself?
I'm kind of like Susan was at this point, like I'm comfortable with myself. Individuals come to me when they want to have discuss something. If they have a question about something, I'm very open and warm, but other individuals will tell you Brandy is very quiet and she stays to herself. So it just depends on which Brandy you get when I'm in the moment, it seems like.
Thank you, Brandy. I'm slow to warm up to people too, so, but once you get to know me, we all right. Stacy, were you gonna say something? No?
This is Kate. I'll go next if you need another person.
Yes.
So my identities include being a daughter, friend, aunt, sister-in-law, cisgendered, liberal, Democrat, triathlete, VR manager, animal lover, reader. And like Susan had said, and like other people have said, one of the things that I really enjoy and strive for is inclusivity amongst my team, finding those connections and those understandings, even if there appear to be some conflicting identities. And what just amazes me is the spectrum of that. So I identify strongly as an animal lover. My friends joke if I go to jail, it's because I got involved in some sort of animal protection type thing. But I have a friend or acquaintance who's a trophy hunter. And they identify as a trophy hunter. And that's something that's important to them. And so I have that conflict. And then on my team, I have people who are on the complete opposite political spectrum. And it's very hard to be mindful of that and respectful. And, you know, David and I were talking, there was a philosophy professor who had said, you know, his line was, "How dare you not judge?" And that sometimes it's okay to judge, but balancing that between still being a strong leader and a good supervisor. When I see the bumper stickers on somebody's car and the talks in the lunchroom, woo, it's hard. It's really, really hard sometimes. I know I'm not the only one that experiences that, but
No.
definitely, definitely sometimes it's a struggle for sure.
Thank you, Kate. Anyone else want to share? Go ahead, Michael.
Sure. So I identify as a person who is deaf. I'm a male. And I hold all the male titles in the family: brother, brother-in-law, uncle, nephew, et cetera, et cetera. But wow, I do find it very interesting that my identity does have an impact on my leadership. I am a culturally deaf person. We tend to be very direct. It is part of our culture. We don't have a filter. We're incredibly direct and straightforward, but that's not a good fit necessarily in a leadership position with hearing people, because hearing culture is quite different and far less direct, much more vague and ambiguous, especially with the type of language that's used to maybe give feedback. And so that's definitely something I've had to learn to make an adjustment. I don't feel it's a problem. It's just something that I have to be aware of and sometimes have to take a step back and assess what's going to work in a particular situation. Also, in my former position, I was a leader for the obstacle course for many, many different teams. And so that was for college students and adult students, high school students, et cetera. And so that definitely influenced my temperament in terms of how to approach or work with teams and how to be engaging and patient, also empathetic and understanding. So those kinds of experiences have influenced my leadership style in this type of work as well. I think that's it.
Thank you, Michael. Michael, I did have a question for you. You said that you're direct. That's part of the culture, deaf culture. But
Yes,
your
that's correct.
DISC leadership style is S, right?
Yes, I think that's correct.
I wonder,
But
go ahead.
before I became a supervisor, I was actually a D.
Really?
And then after I became a supervisor and made some adjustments, I don't know if it was a CS or an SCS something.
Got it.
Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you. Time for one more, if anyone else wants to share on their identities. Really great conversation. I love hearing from you and how this impacts how you show up at work. How powerful this would be to share this with your colleagues as well.
I'll go
Provides
next,
this great
Robbie.
understanding. Thank you, Carol. Go ahead.
I was pretty short and sweet with mine. You know, I identify as a mother, a grandmother of 3 boys. I'm an East Tennessee program manager. I'm a Christian. I'm a widow, sorry. And I look at that and I think, man, I have, over the last year and a half, I have become so involved with my work that I need to really start expanding. I mean, what it opened my eyes to, that I need to get out there and start expanding my circle again, because I just kind of shut myself off for the last year and a half since a lot of life changes and then a job change on top of all that. And I've just kind of closed that circle off. So if one thing I do need to do is expand my circle more than just work relationships and things like that. If one thing, and that would be the one thing I would change within my life. That was kind of eye-opening for me, I think.
Thank you, Carol. You think circumstances cause you to shut?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think with the life changes that I've had in this last year and a half, I think it's just made me more concentrated on my work life and more concentrated. And then when I'm at home, I'm more concentrated on my grandsons. It's just, and I've just not expanded. I just kind of shut my circle out, and I need to do different on that.
Thank you for sharing. It's great to do these self-awareness activities to help us see where we are and where we need to grow. All right. Last call, if anyone else. I think we have a few more minutes.
Hey, Robin, I'll comment on what Kate shared. I feel like there needs to be a do no harm kind of civility statement when we think about how we respond to the differences of others. Because like you said, seeing the bumper stickers can be like, oh my gosh. And traveling, when we pull up to certain places and I see certain signs, it's like, okay, do I want to frequent this establishment? Am I safe here? But also, am I judging or am I protecting myself? Like, which one is happening in that moment? So yeah, it can be hard to see that, but knowing that it's a duty to be open to understanding the differences of others without that judgment.
I'm curious though, on the professor or the philosopher you mentioned said it's okay. Say it again.
So it was and I don't remember if it's a philosophy professor or a law school professor, but the line was, "How dare you not judge?" And it was in response to somebody who had talked about, I don't judge anybody. I accept everything, but that there are times when you might need to make that judgment call to protect others or to protect yourself.
Thank you for clarifying. Thank you for that. Great discussion. I encourage you to think more about your identities, how it impacts your values, how you show up for work, how you present, and maybe even align your identities with your values in terms of, this is how I think I show up and this is how I actually show up. And this is what I'm hoping, and this is the reality. So have that discussion, have that reflection for yourselves, and maybe even take it a step further, have the discussion with your colleagues. There are things that you all shared about yourselves today I didn't know anything about until we've had this discussion. So great activity to have with your colleagues to bring about greater inclusion, awareness, develop a sense of belonging. This type of activity takes intention. And if we want to stop the bleed, if we want people to stay within our organizations, we have to be intentional on how we're going to do it, how we're going to show up. And we all want to be able to spend time coaching our staff, pouring into them. Well, this is a great way, a great starting point to have that conversation, to get to know the people that you're working with. What do they value? What are their identities? What's important to them? How do they show up, or what do they prefer in their communication style? All of that will help you in your goal to become a better leader, a better manager for your organization. All right, I think we're scheduled now for a brief break, David, or did we want to do that now, or what's the general consensus? About 14 minutes and noon we'll get started?
Yeah.
All right, so we'll take a brief 14-minute break, And then we'll come back at noon and get started with our discussion on performance management and contract negotiations. Thank you.
Hi, this is my colleague Sharina Sewell, who is the district director for one of the regions here at Virginia DARS. She oversees offices across the Capital District in the state of Virginia, 5 offices. And I'm excited to share this presentation. It's going to be broken into 2 parts where we will pause for a breakout room, come back for a final thought related to that activity, and then take a break. And then we'll do the second half. And let's hope I did this right.
So before you start the recording, during the recording, since we're gonna have our cameras, is it okay for us to have our cameras off, you think? And then
Yeah.
during the breakout discussion, we'll come back with our fully cameras on and all.
Absolutely. So if there are questions or comments in the chat, we'll take them at the end of the first part, so as not to have to try to pause and start Sharina's presentation, if that is okay.
Thank you.
All right, and let's go. Can you all see Sharina?
We can.
Why is it not moving?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, or good afternoon. I'm not really sure what time it is right now for some of you, but it is morning here. And so I say good morning. My name is Sharina Sewell. I am a district director working for the Department for Aging and Rehabilitative.
I think we lost sound there.
Another engagement, but I am happy to talk to you all about subjects that are near and dear to my heart, and hopefully you find the information valuable and useful. And if any of you want to connect with me after, my contact information will be on the last slide. Okay, so I am going to share my screen. Let's get into that so that you can get the good stuff. Okay, well, this isn't at the beginning. Here we go. All right. So I'm going to be talking about managing from the middle, featuring contract negotiations, starring performance management with the conflict management with staff. Now, I know that these subjects, they can be lengthy. We could easily spend half day, full day discussing some of these topics, but I don't have that kind of time. I know you don't either. So I'm going to do my best to touch on a little bit from each topic. Okay. All right. So I want you all to think about your journey to get to where you are now. I believe some of you might be supervisors, some of you may be managers, some directors, but think about where you started. It may have been at the counselor level. It may have been at a supervisory level, and then you went into, management at the VR level. But no matter how you got there, I know, and you all probably know, that our training probably looked very different. The way I started my career in VR was as a counselor, made my way to a supervisor, district manager, and now a district director. But a lot of the preparation that we get as middle managers, it really kind of falls on longevity, kind of on the job training, experiences that you have in the moment, right? So a lot of what we deal with day to day, it's vast. And it's really important that we continue to develop the skills we need so that as we further our journey at managing at the VR level, we are fully prepared. And I just want to say, I will refer to you all in some aspect as middle managers, only because I think for most of you, you have people reporting up to you, and then you have someone that you are reporting to. So we're kind of right here, okay? Just for the sake of today. So when you think about your purpose and your role every day when you go into the office, you are many things to many people, right? You could be many things to one person, and it could change every single day. So from any given day, you're expected to be a trainer. You're expected to know what's going on and analyze your budget, interpret data, hire new people, build people up, make sure that you're building growth mindset builders, that you're coordinating resources for your staff, that you are making decisions, that you're positive change seekers, that you're boosting morale, and obviously performance management. So the role differs every single day. And a lot of managers find themselves grappling with, what do I focus on? How can I be all these things and be effective? Well, I read an article not too long ago from Dr. Schultz. It was in the Journal of Rehab Counseling, and Dr. Schultz is the current department chair at Virginia Commonwealth University's Rehabilitation Counseling Department. He talked about how important it is for managers to adopt what's called a tripartite model of managing. And tripartite kind of means you're looking at managing in 3 parts. Administrative supervision, which kind of has to do with looking at your budget, knowing all the outputs going out, your spending, fiscal management, operations, things like that. But you're also, as a manager, looking at professional development for your staff. You're constantly finding ways to allow and help them grow. And he also talked about looking at the clinical side of supervision. The clinical side of supervision has to do with making sure counselors are skilled and trained, making sure they have the resources so that the outcomes are going to be there. So at that, he really felt strongly that for managers to be successful, that we should be operating out of this tripartite model of management. However, there are some now who believe that we should be moving away from a tripartite model to a quadripartite or quadripartite model. So this not only includes that being a clinical supervisor, if you will, administrative and professional development, but that we also have to focus part of our time and attention to recruitment and retention, which is its own entity. And we're finding that managers really have to have all of these skills and really have to be able to do all of these things on a regular basis in order for their day-to-day to flow the way it should as a manager. So using a quadripartite model of supervision, what this means is that really many counselors, they're not satisfied fully with the level of clinical supervision that they're getting from their managers. So clinical supervision, it could include regular evaluations, it could include one-to-one meetings, just ongoing feedback and overall development, continued development, so staff have what they need to do their job continuously. Many times we make sure we train our staff, give them what they need, and off they go. And as things come up, we address those things, but it's not necessarily ongoing. And there's no right or wrong reason. Many times it's because we're dealing with some of those things that I listed on the previous slide as far as our day-to-day, right? But when you're looking at this part of the model, you're really focusing and intentionally trying to develop and maintain a supportive relationship with your staff, intentionally trying to do that. So you're utilizing roles beyond supervisor to develop and enhance skills. You are supporting counselors and helping them to maintain and improve their standards outlined by CRCC. And in order for you all to do this, it has to be intentional, because This isn't just your everyday, I'm gonna wake up and do my job. You have to deliberately make time to do these things. You're looking at addressing gaps in knowledge and expertise. This may be, thinking creatively about bringing other people in from other departments and working and collaborating with other people. You are purposely exposing counselors to various work situations and responsibilities, which incorporates growth. You're incorporating clinical theories into the day-to-day work of counselors, because again, this is applied learning, going from wherever they went to school, whether it was a rehab program, a social work program, a business admin program, whatever it is important that we then incorporate those theories into their day-to-day transferable learning, and making sure that we're staying abreast to the research and data and implementation within the team, okay? So looking at the quadripartite model, but focusing on more of the administrative supervision. So when looking at this, we're primarily focusing on the things that affect our consumers or our clients. So we're looking as well as stakeholders, community partners, vendors, anyone outside of our immediate staff. So we're looking at fiscal, how we are budgeting and spending our money on services. Outcomes and performance, where are we in meeting our WIOA indicators? Are we following policy and procedures? And really overall developing and monitoring organizational policies and procedures that our counselors have to follow. So this takes a big chunk of our time as managers as well, but again, equally as important as the other aspect in the model. So the other aspect that Schultz and others say we need to look at is the professional development. That's another part in the quadripartite model. And that's literally genuinely taking an interest in inquiring about what's next. What are we going to do next? Always growing, not only with your staff, but your office as a whole, yourself, your agency, really exposing counselors to roles outside of being a counselor. There are some people you work with that want to move up, grow up, and some they want to grow this way, and that's okay. But again, looking at how you can expose counselors to other things outside of their day-to-day, making sure you understand their professional goals and what they want to work on, what they want to be a part of. There could be other avenues that they haven't explored. And so it's key that you as the manager help them develop and understand their professional goals, and really assisting them develop and grow their professional identity. A lot of us work with people that have changed careers, that are new graduates. And when you recall the list I put earlier about all the things we have to be, we are part of their development as well. And so just making sure that we're keeping this professional development aspect in mind is going to be important as well. Now, I mentioned earlier, these models, or excuse me, these aspects of this model make up the tripartite model. But looking at the quadripartite model, it includes a missing piece. And that missing piece has to do with retention and recruitment and succession planning. So I know, because we're all in VR, we have heard how difficult it has been to fill our vacancies, to retain qualified, really good VR staff. And so let's talk a minute about this. So for the purpose of context, this visual picture, it represents the proportion of working people between 2000 and 2030. So Alpha, 2013 until present, those are the babies of the generation. We have Generation Z, which is 1997 until 2012. Generation Y, also known as millennials, they're 1981 to 1996. Generation X, 1965 until 1980, baby boomers, 1946 until about 64. And so this is just really good information. And you'll also see that there is a silent generation, which often gets missed in the whole conversation. But those are folks who were born between 1928 and 1945. So when you look at this, just take a look. What are your initial thoughts in looking at this? So as a manager, supervisor, if we still don't start having conversations about succession planning, who's coming and who's going, we are not only missing a major piece in our everyday conversation, but we're not going to be able to address that last piece of the quadripartite model, that of retention and recruitment, because it starts with succession planning. It is looking at this and evaluating this within your own area it can be a strategic process, an intentional process for replacement planning. If you didn't know by now, intentional is one of my favorite words. But the retirement of baby boomers who typically used to work 30+ years in state or federal government, they had good salary, good benefits, good work-life balance. Many employers are grappling now with, why can't I get anyone anymore when I was able to before? Who doesn't want those things? Who doesn't want that work-life balance, good benefits, and being able to stay somewhere for 30 years? You are grappling with, how do I now find and attract good staff? Once they're here, how do I keep them? And the truth is, a lot of people, they may not want to work that 9 to 5 anymore. For myself, I have staff, about a quarter of my staff are going to be retiring in the next 1 to 5 years, right? So when you think about that, it's like, oh, shoot, snap. Oh my goodness, what am I going to do? And I know some of you are in the same situation. So if we're not looking at this piece of succession planning regularly, we're missing the quadripartite model, and we're missing a key aspect of what our duties are as managers and supervisors. We have to pay attention to the shift and address the needs as the shift occurs. Okay, so let's just talk about using the quadripartite model and looking at retention, excuse me, and recruitment. A lot of people think that as we were fully in the throes of COVID-19, they thought that was the reason why we were losing people and why we weren't able to get qualified applicants to the table, or not really qualified, but not as many applicants. The truth is, COVID wasn't the reason that we've been having retention and recruitment problems in VR. It may have been a symptom, but if you pay attention and look at data, it's kind of been getting harder for years, kind of been going down, right? It was a symptom of what's to come. So it's important that we really take a data-driven approach and really identify the following. Why are staff leaving? Is it because of retirement? Is it because of growth? Is it because of opportunities? We have to look at who are the highest risk of staff, who are the highest risk staff that are leaving, and find out why. We have to be familiar with knowing the intentions to leave, okay? Intentions to leave are things like just not happy, not really being a team player. You can kind of see them coming to work, doing the job, but nothing else, you might be getting phone calls about references a little bit more, things like that. And it's key for you to think about the conversations that you're having with your staff and how often. So let's all take salary off the table, okay? Because we always know that is a reason why people seek out other employment. But when you take that off, look at what matters to your staff and kind of figure out what is attractive to them. And obviously, it's going to look different. It's going to look different generationally based on who is in front of you, whether there's someone from millennial, Gen Z, baby boomers, it's going to look different. It's going to be very individualized. And we can't have a one size fits all way of doing business or running an office. So we have to address these things strategically, looking at all the scenarios we have in place and trying to figure out what will get people to come and what will get people to stay. So not only are we looking at internal mobility, but we are looking at balance of work. We're looking at if they have access to technology and resources, and of course, flexibility. So these are some of the things that staff has said they're interested in. So when we look about what makes people stay on the job, retention, it's important for you to know what makes your employees happy, what keeps them there. Talk to them about these things. Oftentimes people just work, they work for us. We talk to them about performance, training, other things, but we don't just have a conversation where we're like, you've been here 5 years now. This is your 5-year anniversary. This is your 3-year anniversary. How's it going? You're still with us. You made it past your probation. We're so happy. Why did you continue to stay here? I'm really interested in knowing what parts of the job are rewarding and interesting. What is challenging for you right now? What are your long-term goals? And are there any committees or projects that you have heard about that you want to be on? Is there anything you're curious about in our agency? These are conversations that we really have to get comfortable having with our staff, and not just when there is intent to leave, but on a regular basis, okay? When we're looking at recruitment, it's important that we look at this differently as well. I don't know about y'all, but typically when we're looking at hiring someone, of course, we're looking at the typical, their education and their experience, because a lot of times that speaks to what they can bring to the table. But I challenge you to hire based on potential. Sometimes it's not just about experience, it's what this person could possibly bring to the table. It's also key that as you're doing recruitment as a manager, think about how you are doing outreach, because it matters. Going back and posting things on a recruitment website or Indeed, and those are things we're going to do anyway, but we have to go beyond that. I can speak to what we're doing in the area in which I work. In my district, we have a strategic plan, and part of that plan addresses outreach, not only for our clients and consumers, but outreach for future staff. Who are we talking to? What does that look like? Don't be afraid to use the newest person in your office. Many times I've been asked to go to local colleges and universities, rehab programs, and talk about vocational rehab. And rather than bringing my seasoned person, I'm bringing the newest person. And I'm like, hey, they are in it. Talk to these people about it. Let them know what's good, not what's bad. It's important that you're creative. Figure out how you can create a day in the life of a counselor and have interns come, or not even interns, students who are in psychology programs, social work programs, rehab programs, business programs. Let them come spend time with you and your staff so they can see what a day in the life of a counselor looks like. Another thing, change the way you do interviews, right? If you do panel interviews, change it up if you want to, get creative, and work on your elevator pitch. So when people usually seek us out for jobs, they are obviously preparing and working on what they want to say and what they want to cover. It is equally as important that we work on our elevator pitch. Every time I have an event to go to, especially if it's a recruitment fair or informational fair, I make sure I have my elevator pitch ready. So people will want to know more. They will call me. I've had students call me from Florida. They're like, oh, I heard you talk here, or I heard what you had to say about this. Tell me more. So I'm reeling people in. Again, just thinking about a different way of doing recruitment And lastly, change your expectations of education and experience. That is something we're also doing in Virginia, looking at what's really needed to do the job. You know, years ago, like 25, 30 years ago, and some of you may remember this, but VR counselors, they didn't need a master's degree. Some, I think some states, they may have had a high school diploma, don't quote me on that, but we have advanced where I know in Virginia, we require our vocational rehab counselors to have a master's degree in either rehab counseling or some closely related field. But we are now looking at the aspects of the job of a VR counselor and figuring out, do you really need a master's degree to do all the aspects? For example, pre-employment transition services, you don't need a master's degree to do those things. You don't have to be a CRC to do those things. Maybe someone with a bachelor's degree can do those things. So just kind of looking at that and figuring out your expectations, and that's great. So this is just the depiction, if you will. I'm actually going to show it on this one. So this graph is the graph that was just shown, but this is depicting the reality of where we are in terms of recruitment and retention, because we have to have a shift in our flexibility. The days of coming in the office from 9 to 6 or 8 to 5 or whatever it was, those are over, and they happen for a while, right? Many of you probably don't even do that. Millennials, they want something different. They want to work, but they want their work to look different for them. And we have to think about how these shifts work as related to retention and recruitment. So these surveys here suggest that upcoming and current generations, they want flexibility in their job. Hell, I want flexibility in my job, right? And I don't know if I'm current generation. I guess I am, because I'm currently working anyway. They want to work they want to telework at least 50% of the time. They want the option to go into the office as needed. Generation Z, if you look at what's to the right, Generation Z respondents, they're less likely than millennials to indicate they would choose work-life balance over a well-paid job. So again, we just have to think about some of these things as managers, because it does affect the way that we are looking at recruitment and retention, okay? So final considerations regarding some of the information I just shared. We are all grappling with the idea of what does managing from the middle look like? Try to use a quadripart model when you think about managing your everyday. You're looking at clinical, administrative, professional development, and recruitment and retention, and incorporating that very thoughtfully and intentionally in every single thing you do. We are part of a critical system, and it's integral to the capacity of the agency, of your jobs, wherever you may work, to adapt to new challenges and unique circumstances. And it's important that we look at all 4 of those aspects within the model so that we can rise to the occasion. And we're in the optimal position, managers and supervisors, to have really, to kind of have a positive, we have a positive role in the areas of growth and development and flexibility for everyone that we supervise. We have it within our power to make those things happen. So in order to maximize that potential, we have to have a broader perspective of how we do our work. And these are just some considerations that I want you to look at. So continue to make succession planning part of your everyday conversation, part of your agenda meetings. You can develop a strategic plan solely around that if you wanted to. Make sure you look at data, formal and informal, on who's going in terms of retirement, or your staff that are have an intent to leave. so you can get an idea of how you want to go about outreach for new staff. You want to treat outreach with regards to new staff as you would outreach for your consumers. Who are you missing? Where are you not looking? Consider revamping or changing how you would retain and recruit staff on a year-to-year basis. Again, don't be afraid to use the newest person in your office, get feedback from staff, utilize work groups, because this isn't something you have to do alone. Recruitment and retention, I tell folks, it is everybody's business, right? It's everyone's job, because when we're short-staffed, we all feel it, you know? And so anyway, these are just some things I want you to consider regarding the quadripart type model, managing from the middle around recruitment, retention, and just balancing everything you have to do on a day-to-day basis. Okay, moving on to the next topic. Told you, I'm gonna be moving. I don't have a whole lot of time, but I'm gonna get you what you need. So we're gonna be talking about contract negotiation. Some of you may be thinking in your role that you don't do a lot of contract negotiations, but I assure you, you do. So contract negotiations, they can be the source of strength in a relationship or a pivot upon which negotiated agreements fall apart, says Harvard Law School, a review in Harvard Law School. I want you to take a look at this clip. It's about 3 minutes long. It has to do with a negotiation. Now, negotiations may not be quite like this, but it is still a negotiation, and I think you'll find it funny. So let me go ahead and play that.
I'm sorry you had to wait for this, Sherry. I hope there was enough shark meat in the refrigerator for one of your sandwiches. Hold on. This is the same amount I was paying you when you worked full time, and now you're just working nights.
It's the hourly rate.
You understand my confusion. I'm actually paying you more money to be here half the time. I'm not saying that what you do isn't important. Avery and I appreciate you, and Liddy just adores you. But let's just say you're at the market buying potatoes, and that 10-pound bag of potatoes costs $400. But then the grocery concierge tells you that a 5-pound bag of potatoes costs $400. Well, that would be shocking, right? Because a 5-pound bag should only cost $200. What I'm saying is that we value what you do, but this rate is unreasonable.
So, what you want to do?
I want to resolve this fairly and amicably. And I don't want any bad blood. So it was nice negotiating with you, and here is all of your money.
Look, broadcast networks receiving licensing fees is unprecedented, Jack. But we're willing to offer NBC 10% of what we pay cable. I mean, okay, not to negotiate against myself, but I get where you guys are coming from. Look, NBC is part of the Cabletown family now. It's our baby, and we want it to thrive. But your offer it's unreasonable.
So what you want to do?
So what you want to do? I love that. It cracks me up. Let me get back to where it needs to be. Hold on a second, y'all. So contract negotiations, okay, they don't exactly go like that, right? But they can be pretty close. She was like, it's me only rate. Cracks me up. Anyway, oh, I accidentally played it again. 1 moment. Sorry. Apparently, I like it that much. Anyway, so our negotiations, they're not quite like that, but I'm positive you all have run into someone who isn't budging, right? Anyway, So as managers and supervisors, or anyone in a sort of leadership role in VR, we do have to know how to negotiate contracts. Now, there's both informal and formal contracts. Some formal contracts are those that you have to sign, as well as maybe leadership above you. That could include any IFA partnership agreements with WIOA partners. It could be agreements, contracts you have for the rent or utilities in your office buildings. It could be contracts with Department of Education, contracts with various pre-act services with different vendors, and so. And honestly, our staff, they actually do informal contracts all the time with their clients with regards to, you do this, I do this, that type of thing. So it's a part of our regular routine, and it is something that we have to make sure we are skilled up on, because proper negotiation from a managerial standpoint, it really can make or break what you want to do, where you want your office to go, how services are going to be delivered, so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and get into that, because there are four C's of contract negotiation that are felt to be really important and are part of contract negotiation. They are types of contract negotiation styles, if you will, and they are communication, compromising, competing, collaborating. And I'll be honest, if you look at this picture here, you can see communication is in the middle, with collaboration, competing, and compromising kind of coming out on the side. So we're going to get into each one and talk about how, as you negotiate, how these things kind of come into play. So communication, as you saw, was right in the middle, because it's probably one of the most important things as part of a negotiation process within a contract. Negotiations, they also communicate, or using communication in negotiations, it's important because it helps clarify preferences, viewpoints, and perspectives. It allows people to exchange information fairly on an even keel, so that the other party can clearly hear others' ideas, their convictions, and why they are leaning towards the way that they are leaning. So it's really because of that reason that communication is probably the most important tool in contract negotiation. Now, all of you have probably been part of contract negotiations where you're doing some sort of compromise. Compromise it's a must when you're in a relationship where you truly value equality in the outcome. You're splitting the difference, you're sharing the cost. You know, it's an approach where nobody wins, but no one loses either, and that usually sits pretty well with people. So effectively, this would be the only approach to negotiation that is neutral. Also another good option, right? So when you think about contract negotiation and collaboration, that's when the outcome is mutually beneficial to both parties, and you actively work to help them get the most that you can out of it. Collaboration is probably the most effective strategy for negotiation, because usually everyone is satisfied, and usually it kind of results in a win-win. Everybody feels good. Let's do it again in the future. Usually when you're a good collaborator and you collaborate on a negotiation, you are sharing something, you know, doesn't fall on one person. And because of that, you tend to want to renew said contract. Looking at competing in contract negotiation is used when you don't really care if the outcome affects the other party. You're just trying to win that contract negotiation. You're in it to win it. You strive to be the winner. Doesn't matter. The relationship doesn't matter. And so you're really competing when it comes to utilizing this type of contract negotiation. So let's look for a minute at negotiation lifestyle. So I found this chart and I like it because it talks about the lifestyle of negotiation. I found it not too long ago because I was involved in a mediation that could have gone to a fair hearing, but we decided to start with mediation, which in essence is negotiation. And we were actually this was a negotiation between services that we would provide to an individual, which then ended up being on a larger scale in terms of our services and our policy and so on and so forth. But when we did this case, it was really successful the way in which we negotiated and went through this life cycle. It was so successful. We were asked to present this at NDRN's annual conference in DC last year. It was really good. And so I believe the actual title of that of the workshop we did was our alternate dispute resolution, mediation, and negotiation. So in that case, let me just kind of tell you what happened. We were working with a young man that wanted assistance from VR to pay for college. And if I remember correctly, the young man really wasn't eligible for VR to pay or fund college at that time. And they thought that we should pay back and forth anyway. So we decided to go to mediation so we can negotiate some things. So the first thing we did was we decided to negotiate. We decided to negotiate, and in my mind, I said, this is a relationship worth saving because this is a consumer, right? We want to save this relationship. We want to make sure that we can continue to work together. We had to identify the issue. With any contract negotiation, you're going to identify the issue. How did we get here? Why are we here? Why are we negotiating? It could be a service. It could be a rate. You could be negotiating a rate change. You could be negotiating something you had in the contract last year, such as in your rental agreement with janitorial services, and now you're negotiating something different this year because your needs change. Either way, you're going to identify that issue, define the problem, and decide, are we going to negotiate this or not? When you're deciding, if you're competing, you're like, I am digging my feet in, there's no negotiation, this is what we want, can we get it? If you're collaborating, you're really working together to see how you can move forward and negotiate a contract. Then you're going to prepare for this negotiation. It's important that you understand the other party's issue, that you hear them. And remember, we talked about that early on as part of the 4 C's. Making sure that you're still building that relationship because you want to preserve that relationship. It's important to you. Then you're going to start by negotiating, then you're going to negotiate. That's a lot of back and forth. It's kind of like, if we do this, can you do this? You're going to give different alternatives. You're going to evaluate the alternatives and see what works for the other party. And once you do negotiate, you're going to capture that information in writing. So with this young man, while we couldn't pay for his future college expenses, we did agree to pay the balance, which was minimal, that he had from the previous year, as we were kind of in limbo with this discussion. We were able to capture what we would do going forward with reference to funding all VR services. We were able to capture that in an agreement. We were able to write that down and have each party look at it. And we kind of executed it. We were like, wow, we really had this successful contract mediation negotiation. And I'm making it seem minimal because I can't remember everything that happened, but this process that led up to this actual negotiation was several weeks. And we spent 4 hours in the negotiation process, very much in separate rooms and coming together and that kind of thing. But as we executed what we decided, we had to make sure that we were doing what we said we would do. Both parties, follow up was involved, making sure that we're doing what we said that we would do, and just making sure that we're continuing to nurture the relationship after the negotiation. Because sometimes when you're negotiating, you may be giving something up. Sometimes you may be really not in agreement, and you want to make sure that you're still following up and nurturing that relationship that you have. Unless, of course, you're competing and you don't care. So what I want you to do, we're going to get in our small groups. Going to talk a little bit about contract negotiation. I have a case study that's right after this slide. And I want you to get in your groups, take a few minutes to read the case study, which I'll bring up in a minute. Think about contract negotiation. Think about the 4 C's and the lifestyle of contract negotiation. And I want you to discuss the following. Based on what you read, what's the issue or service that you want to negotiate? What steps will you take to prepare for the negotiation? And what do you want the end result to be or look like? This may be different based on what you want, based on what you read, and that's okay. But go ahead and take 10 minutes and you can go through that. I'm just going to read this case study. So, move my head out the way. An employment service organization that is a regular vendor your agency works with to provide pre-employment transition services has entered into an agreement last year with one of your local offices to provide pre-eds in the form of a year-long curriculum. The original contract, which expires next month, stated that services would be for about 10 students, a semester, 24 a year, no more than up to 24 a year. The program would run 2 days per week for 4 hours each day. Recently, you learned the ESO had staffing issues. So they indicated that they now want to decrease the number of students and they want to decrease the hours to 2 hours per day. You're not in agreement with this because that's not what you all decided on with your contract. And you have asked for a meeting to discuss and negotiate this contract. So again, what is the issue? What steps will you take to prepare for the negotiation? And what do you want the end results to look like? I'm going to leave this up. I'm going to start this for 10 minutes and I'll see you soon.
All right, I have paused the video. And now we would go to breakout rooms for 10 minutes to discuss this.
Okay, I'm going to open up the breakout rooms, David, and they will go into rooms with their accountability partners.
I hope you all had a chance to discuss this scenario and looked at contract negotiation and just think about utilizing the 4 C's, you know, what you would look at in terms of contract negotiation. It is a part of what we do as managers. It will probably be a part of what's to come if you haven't been involved in contract negotiations yet. So I know that was a very short, condensed information. I apologize for that. Like I said, some of these topics we could talk for many hours about. Anyhow, I'm going to get into the next topic, which is not a break. Fooled you. It is actually performance management. Okay, so Wikipedia, I don't know what that is. Wikipedia defines performance management as the process of ensuring that a set of activities and outputs meets an organization's goals in an effective and efficient manner. Performance management can focus on the performance of a whole organization, a department, or an employee, or the processes in place to manage particular tasks. So for most of us, when we talk about performance management and our roles, we're talking about managing one or more employees. And for most of us, performance management is probably top priority on our job descriptions. It is something we are tasked with doing every day. By a show of hands, is there anyone that does not supervise others? Show of hands. Y'all know I can't see you, right? I don't know who's raising their hand. I just wanted to see if you would do it. Anyway, the truth is a lot of what we do, it is managing the performance of someone else, usually our employees. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that and what that looks like. So when we talk about performance management, there are many things that go into that. Each business or agency is going to look at performance management differently, but because we are in VR, I would think that most of our measurements are very similar. So most agencies look at very specific measures, such as your WIOA indicators, your PREX measures, but also looking at any sort of agency business or values. You know, at DARS, we have core values that we look at, and we tie that into performance management, such as customer service or the ability to adapt to change, and things like that. We may also look at performance management based on projects that our staff are involved in. There are staff that are on committees or involved in projects, but that is another way we look at performance management, as well as growth and volunteer opportunities. Just really looking at what our staff are doing outside of their day-to-day, how they're contributing not only to the office, but to the agency as a whole. So this could vary a great deal. So as a manager, and this kind of hints on some of what we talked about earlier, in terms of performance management and everything else, all other duties divine, think about what you do day to day. Are you spending more time answering emails and phone calls, putting out fires? Are you a data person? So you spend a lot of your time looking at and analyzing data. Are you doing more administrative tasks, or training? And again, I know this varies day to day based on what's in front of you for the day and what's happening, but I know that your work days vary because you have different priorities. Think about what amount of time do you give to some of these tasks listed above? And then think about the time that you spend on actually performance management as relates to coaching, mentoring, supervising, things like that. So when we've talked to managers, they say that administrative tasks, running the office, operations, procedures, meetings take up about 47% of their total day. Whereas the actual act of supervising employees, which may be a little subjective, takes up about 19%. And then coaching and mentoring take up about 10%. And then there are others that take up a smaller percentage. A lot of managers and supervisors want to flip some of those numbers. So they want to be able to spend more time doing more coaching, more mentoring, helping their staff grow so that performance management looks different. It doesn't mean that by not doing that now that we're not looking at performance management. It just means that we have to find a way to really make that a priority in what we do. Performance management, it involves the communication between a manager and their employee. It sets the tone for what's to be expected at every performance year or fiscal year, and it sets the tone with regards to how that will be measured It's also about more than just employee preparation, right? That's not solely what performance management is. It's not solely about how someone is doing with their quote unquote numbers. It's about growth opportunities. It's about succession planning. It's about coaching and mentoring. It's more than just corrective action planning or catching someone make mistakes. There are good stuff that we can find in performance management. So if you take a look at this graph, look at these stats, these were posted by SHRM. It's 2023 data. So earlier we talked about communication being key in contract negotiation. It is also key in performance management. If you take a second to look at this data, you'll see the highest percentage here with regards to the percent of employees get feedback from their managers. That frequency is at 28%. That's the highest, and that's really just a few times a year, followed by second highest, 27%, which is getting feedback a few times per month. So it also shows that 19% feel that they get feedback a few times a week, and 19% once a year or less, and only 7% get feedback daily. So I find this to be really interesting because it really does go back to how we are providing feedback, how we're providing communication, and how often we're sharing and looking at performance management with staff. And sometimes this may change. It may change seasonally during budget time, when the school year begins, when you're short-staffed. I do understand that. But managers can really use this this kind of feedback as an empowerment tool rather than a punitive one. So even though employees may say, "Oh, you're not communicating with me frequently," and that may be so, utilize that and that data to say, how can I kind of flip those numbers? So it's important that when we're looking at performance management, we are keeping more than one tool in our toolbox. We shouldn't be looking at performance management for everyone the same way. While people may be measured on certain core measures, the way in which we capture that or look at it is going to look different. It could look different besides going past the data, right? So you don't want to count solely on looking at data and then doing your annual reviews with regards to performance management. Count on other things. Don't make the annual review your only tool. Look at self-evaluations, self-reviews, peer reviews. If your staff are involved in work groups or committees, get information about how they're doing. It's not like you're going behind them and saying, "Hey, so-and-so is on this committee. What are they doing in that committee? Are they any good? Are they showing up on time?" It's not that. It is genuinely taking an interest in what they do. And we talked about this earlier with managing from the middle, genuinely taking an interest, because as you do that, you will learn exactly what your staff is doing, right? Be sure to create what I call micro moments in which you're gaining more information about how they're doing with regards to performance management. Give feedback often and make sure employees are part of their own performance management. It is not just up to you to gather this information and figure out how they're doing. They should be allowed space and the time to share that information with you. Again, utilizing peer reviews. And it's important that you're proactive about when you're communicating performance management, how often, where, what's the environment, so that your staff can hear it and receive what you have to say. Always want to make sure your expectations around performance management are clear. I tell my staff, I will do my best to look at you holistically. So while you have these core measurements and these percentages you have to hit, please know I'm looking at your customer service skills with our internal and external partners. Know that I am looking at whether you are putting yourself out there and volunteering in other aspects in our agency. And it's also really important that you're intentional about celebrating the good stuff when it comes to performance management, because those are the things that matter as well. So the other thing I want to talk about is balancing performance management with the other duties as assigned, because we all know, we talk about how every day we're doing so many different things and it's really hard to figure out the priority in what you're doing. So it's going to be important to create an office strategic plan around your goals. When I say your goals, that doesn't just mean your goals as the manager, but it also includes your office goals, your staff's goals. Figure out how you all want to achieve those, because that is also part of performance management. Who was involved? Who said they're going to do something and actually did it? Utilize a performance management cycle to help keep you on track. So if you're going to use various tools and look at performance in different ways, keep yourself on a cycle or a schedule, so you're not just counting on, oh my God, it's the end of the performance year, I have to review my staff. What did they do? Be intentional about when you're going to be looking at how they're doing, when you're going to follow up with some of their peers, when you're going to follow up with them. So create that performance management cycle. It's important that you make space so staff can talk about their accomplishments, because you all know we're not going to capture everything, especially if we have more than one staff that's reporting to us. There's no way you're going to know everything they're doing. And in order to really evaluate someone holistically, it's important you give them space and time for them to talk about their day, their accomplishments, and listen, so that you're not only listening for problems, because as managers, we often want to be problem solvers, but you're listening to hear the good stuff. And just know that when everyone is a part of performance management, it allows you, the manager, other time to work on other things. So it's really a win-win situation. So I encourage you to look at performance management in different ways throughout the entire year. Capture and make micro moments where you're able to really hone in on performance management, make it everybody's business. Evaluate people often, set the tone, make sure they know what they're being measured on. That's not just those core data in their job description, but anything else outside of that, okay? Again, quick snapshot, I know, of performance management, but we only have a short amount of time in performance management. We can go for a full day if we needed to, but I'm gonna go ahead and jump to our next topic, conflict management. How many of you love and thrive in conflict? You know, there are some people that like, ooh, I love conflict, bring it on. And some people really shy away from conflict, right? So let's talk about that. Let's get into conflict management. So why is there conflict? Like, why do we have conflict all the time? Conflict management is the practice of being able to identify and manage conflicts sensibly, fairly, and efficiently. That's the management of the conflict. So conflicts arise when there are perceived threats, when there are disagreements, and really when people just, their opinions differ. So that's why there's conflict. So that's like what, every day, right? Pretty much. So this is why conflict arises, and why it's even more important that as managers, we understand and practice our conflict management skills. So think about your role in VR, and think about the various conflicts that you have had to deal with in your role. Given our roles, we've all had our fair share, you know, whether it was between our clients and our agency, whether it's between our internal and external stakeholders and our partners. We've had it. I've just listed a few that are very similar to what most of you have seen, because we all work in VR. There's conflict with regards to a client not wanting their case closed. With client and counselor, they may not agree on a vocational goal. With workload capacity between staff in an office, salary adjustments, whether someone wants to telework 100% versus coming into the office. There's disagreements in what you wrote in a performance evaluation, you know, and paying for cost services. Even, I know I even had conflict before when trying to negotiate my IFA for my WIOA partners. There's alphabet soup for you, but funding that we were going to be part of as a partner with our WIOA folks. They wanted us to pay a certain percentage for the security guard, and I was in disagreement with the percent that they wanted us to pay. So there arose a conflict, which we were quickly able to handle. But again, that's where conflicts are every day. They are disagreements, and it's important that we know how to manage that conflict. So the reason conflict management is so important is because I truly believe conflict management starts with you. So it starts with knowing who you are. It starts with knowing your own personality, your behaviors, how you typically act and move in situations, because part of conflict management involves sometimes contract negotiation. It involves knowing how you're going to react to perceived threat. It regards to knowing what matters to you. So it really starts with knowing yourself. Personality and behavioral tests, they're commonly used in upper management levels, especially in VR. You know, according to SHRM's acquisition breakdown, 28% of managers, middle managers, use some sort of personality or behavioral assessment to learn more about themselves and their role that will help them better be able to do their jobs. So I listed just a couple. There are many type of assessments out there. You know, some are at cost, some you could do many assessments online, but I listed my top 3 that I liked along the way. One is Everything DISC, which I believe you all have taken. That's an assessment formulated of questions that provide an accurate depiction of someone's personality, their behaviors, their strengths, and typically how they react to situations or how they behave in most situations. It is one of the most widely used assessment tools, one of my favorites. I teach the DISC, and I just really, really like it. Another oldie but goodie is Myers-Briggs, which is more of an assessment that looks at psychological preferences. It kind of gives an indication of how you would make decisions and how you perceive the world. That again goes a lot into conflict management, which is why it's so important you know yourself first. And then 360 leadership assessments or evaluation not only look at how you perceive you, but how others perceive you as well. So the key to understanding how to deal with conflict is to understand a little bit more about yourself. So let's take a look and get into the 5 styles of conflict management. There are 5 styles. The first one is collaborating. Some of these you'll hear there might be overlap between the 5 styles of conflict management and the 4 C's of contract negotiation, okay? So they're gonna sound a little similar at times, but first style is that of collaboration, okay? So when you look at collaboration, the pros of using this is that it really creates a win-win for everyone. Anytime you're looking at a long-term result, you're looking at utilizing collaboration as a style of conflict management, and it builds long-lasting relationship and it increases trust. Again, same thing we mentioned with contract negotiation. The cons with collaborating is it takes a long time because you're investing a lot. You really are. You're taking your time, you're listening, you're sharing, you're going back and you're forth. You know, it takes a long time to deal with conflict management when you're using this style. And it is one of the most difficult styles to use because, again, it goes back to knowing a little bit about yourself, many times when using this style of conflict management, you have to go out of your comfort zone, okay? So let me just give you a quick example of what collaborating in conflict management looks like. Let's say that there's a year-long pre-employment transition services and VR service program that's being provided to a county. In this county, there are 5 high schools, and they all get to have students attend or be part of this program. So they get a couple students involved in it every single year. But there is a cost, a small cost associated with it, because someone has to pay for the para-professional that's going to be assisting the students. Now, all the schools have students there, but someone has to pay for that paraprofessional. And all the schools are like, well, wait a minute, we already did our budget. We want to be involved in this, but we can't afford it. So no one's really saying, oh, we'll take care of it. We'll take care of it. This is true, by the way, this has happened. So we all had to come to the table. This did create conflict because these schools were digging their feet in, and let's be real, because it involved money, it involved budget. So they wanted this for their students, but the conflict was, who's going to pay for it? Not me. We were able to collaborate together. So the end result was that each school was willing to pay a percentage of the salary of their paraprofessional so that the students would be able to take part in this service. At one point, some schools were like, well, this year I only have 1 student and you have 3, therefore you should pay the paraprofessional. While we had to also negotiate this contract and work out the conflict, we were able to collaborate so that each school was paying the same percentage for the paraprofessional. So that's just a quick example of utilizing that style. The next one is competing. So the competing style of conflict management, it basically resolves the dispute quickly. You don't have time to mess around. We have to get through this. Conflict has to go away, so it's resolved quickly. The con to resolving it quickly is it can lower morale and it could decrease productivity. So let me give you an example. So let's say there's an opportunity to have 2 of your staff attend this nationwide national conference in New Orleans, okay? And it's between your substance use disorder counselors. You have 2. But funding only allows you to send 1 person to the conference. So naturally, each counselor wants to go. Counselor 1 is like, pick me, pick me. Counselor 2 is like, pick me. I've been here longer than the other counselor. They're still new. Other counselors like, I'm new, I should go. Various reasons why they both should go. In the meantime, they're kind of, as you're deciding, they're kind of giving sly remarks and joking, but not really joking with one another, talking to their colleagues about why they're the best person to go, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, you say, hey, look, Counselor 1, you're going to go to this conference. Counselor 2, you can go the next time it comes around. End of story. I made an executive decision. Well, guess what? You resolve the conflict pretty quickly, but Counselor 2 might have some resentment towards you. They might be angry, and that therefore will then affect morale. It may affect the colleagues' working relationship, and it may overall affect their productivity. So that's just one example of what that looks like in competing looks like in conflict management. The next style is avoiding, okay? So again, there are some people who just don't like conflict. There are those that thrive and those that just like, oh my God, this is so uncomfortable. I'm just gonna avoid it. It will work itself out on its own. Now, there is a pro to utilizing this style. 1, it allows a cool down period between the parties, which is often necessary, even for yourself, right? But the cons is you're not resolving the conflict, you're just putting it off, which can result in more conflict and miscommunication, right? So let me give you an example. Let's say one of your counselors is in disagreement with a vendor about services and billing. They gave an invoice and they're like, I'm not paying this. So the counselors come to you several times, the vendor has come to you several times, and you're just kind of like, maybe don't give them any referrals right now, just kind of see what happens. Let's just, take a minute, everybody take a breath. So you're kind of avoiding there. And while it may be a good idea just to give everyone a break, it doesn't resolve the conflict. You just avoided it. It's a lose-lose situation. The vendor's not getting any referrals. The counselor doesn't have any resolution to the conflict, which is the billing and the service. So that's an example of where avoiding may have worked for a very short time to allow people to calm down, but overall, it's not a win-win. Didn't solve the conflict. Then we have accommodating. Accommodating is another style of conflict management. Do you ever meet someone and they just want everyone to get along and they just want everybody to be okay? They want to be able to accommodate everyone so people feel good about themselves, you know? Am I talking to anyone? So anyway, accommodating is kind of like the pros are somebody's gonna win, the other party's gonna win. So the other party feels really good about that solution. You've accommodated, as the manager, you've given an accommodation to someone so that they're going to win. So it keeps the peace. It usually always keeps the peace. It's helpful when you're trying to resolve a minor conflict, but it tends to lead to resentment. The other party may say, I'm gonna do this again because it worked. They may take advantage and it creates a win-lose. So let me give you a quick example because this is a minor but everyday occurrence that could cause a conflict. Let's say a case is being transferred from one office to your office, right? And it's a difficult case. None of your counselors, you know, they really don't want it. But the client says, I want to work with counselor A. And you know that they should really be working with counselor B for various reasons, but you give in and you transfer the case to counselor A, even though counselor A says they shouldn't go to me, they should clearly go to counselor B. But the client said, I want counselor A. So you are resolving the conflict quickly. The other party, which is the client, wins, but it keeps the peace because the client's happy, right? It's a minor conflict. But counselor A and B, they could be a little resentful that you did that. The client may say, hey, this worked for me before. If I'm not happy, I'm gonna say I wanna work with this counselor, and poof, it gets done. So accommodating is one of those styles of conflict that should really be thoughtful and be given with consideration. With all of these have to be taken or used thoughtfully, I should say. But that's just a small example, a minor example of accommodating. So the next one is compromising. Let's come to a compromise. The pros of utilizing compromising is you're really seeking a middle ground. If there are time constraints involved, which many times in our day-to-day there are, compromising usually helps. And if both parties are willing to make some sacrifice to resolve the conflict, then a lot of times we use compromise, which is, it is used much more often than we think. The cons are some people consider it a lose-lose. I don't, because I feel like if I'm giving something up and the other party is giving something up, we're both agreeing to that. So even though we're giving something up, we're both doing it. So it doesn't feel as bad. Like all these, it can lead to resentment because both parties are giving something up. But again, this style of conflict is probably one that is widely used just because, you know, if you don't have a lot of time, you need to resolve the conflict and you're really just seeking a middle ground, coming to an agreement. This is typically when you want to use this style of management. So let's talk about why conflict management matters, why we have to understand it and practice it in our roles. Knowing which style you want to use to address conflicts matters based on how you as the manager feels about achieving your goal or maintaining a relationship. Very similar, again, to contract negotiation. So we have to be very thoughtful as we determine how we're going to manage conflict. We get so busy with our day-to-day, sometimes we want to end a conflict very quickly. But again, we have to be thoughtful because it could lead to something that we don't want it to down the road. Thinking about what's important, thinking about the goals, the relationship. And to be honest, the way we think about this largely has to do with knowing ourselves and our own biases, right? It has to do with our behavior type as well. If I'm the type of person that gets a lot of energy from people and I like to work on teams and I like us, I like us all to get along, then I might tend in most situations of conflict management to try to collaborate or accommodate. If you look at this picture here that I have on the right, usually if you look at someone on the right who's collaborating or accommodating, then they highly value achieving the goal and the relationship. Whereas someone who's avoiding might, value, the importance is not on achieving the goal or the relationship. So it really just kind of depends on where you fall here. But if my personality and behavior are such that I dislike conflict, it makes me uncomfortable, I want everyone to be happy, I might avoid more so than often. So as hiring managers, we always have to think about what the end goal is, and which way we want to move and make decisions when it comes to conflict management. Now, if I remember correctly, I heard that all of you have the opportunity to take the DISC. So you know what your DISC style is, right? I took the DISC as well, and I am an I through. But I want us to go into your last breakout, which is also going to be 10 minutes. I want you to read the conflict below, okay? And think about yourself. Remember, I said conflict management starts with you. Knowing more about yourself will probably give you an understanding with regards to how you're going to handle a conflict. Also knowing that because you know more about yourself, you may also know you may need to handle conflict differently. You may need to come out of your comfort zone, right? So keeping your DISC style in mind, which conflict management style, compromising, avoiding, accommodating, collaborating, or competing, might you gravitate to? And I want you to discuss this as a group. So let's say you're a manager of an office with 10 vocational rehab counselors and 2 administrative support staff that provide support to your counselors. One of your support staff has started complaining to you that they are getting all the work done on them while the other support person doesn't share the workload. She feels that it is an 80-20 split where she is doing the bulk of the work. She has also said that counselors tend to come to her more often because she works quickly and they trust her. She said that she mentioned this to the other support person or counterpart, and it kind of caused a rift between them. Counselors have noticed that the 2 support staff are not communicating with one another as much as they used to, and all of the work and support has slowed down. So again, think about your DISC style, which conflict management might you gravitate to, and I want you to discuss it as a group. I'm setting the timer at 10 minutes now.
Okay, if we can go to breakout rooms.
And David, do they come back here after the breakout?
Yeah, or do we want to take, what if we take a 10-minute break? So when the breakout rooms end it, or we can even take a 15-minute break. Okay. Well, I am excited for the second part of this presentation. I have on the screen a little bit about myself, but rather than go into that, I just want to touch on a few things that Sharina briefly mentioned throughout her presentation. She touched on growth mindset, succession planning, salary, what makes people happy, hiring on potential. I would say hire and delegate on range. She talked about feedback percentages, and I would encourage you to think about those feedback percentages, not just for staff, But when nationally we are looking at rapid and continuous engagement with our clients to help slow the attrition rates, how can we take that same knowledge and apply it to how often we engage with the clients we serve? Sharina also mentioned micro moments, and I'm going to touch on that through a different concept called high quality connections, which is something I'm really excited about that we're starting to work on here in Virginia, related to those issues that, you know, short of the governor giving us raises or an alignment, that is not in my area of responsibility, or can I affect that change? So how else can we create an environment where people feel satisfied and that promotes well-being? And with that, we will get started. We were going to start with an exercise that I really enjoy, and it's called the What Went Well exercise. Instead, I would just ask you to, if someone wants to look at this and put in the chat an example of this. I now use this with my team at the beginning or end at every meeting, depending on which team. And the idea is to begin to think about things that what went well, because it will help you steer your focus towards positive events, and then go deeper by considering what allowed those desirable outcomes to occur. This exercise is from Dr. Martin Seligman, who's considered a founding father of positive psychology. And it came from his book, Flourish, A Visionary New Understanding of Happiness and Well-Being. What Seligman and his colleagues found was that this activity led to higher rates of life satisfaction and lower rates of negative emotion. And more importantly, that positive impact lasted for as much as 6 months beyond the activity. So the way it would work, you would, again, set down a few minutes. You would actually write this down with paper and pen and write 3 things down that went well and why they went well. And then you would share them and discuss that with your team. And if you did that every day, it would have even greater exponential effects. So if anyone wants to think about what went well and put something in the chat, that would be fantastic. This has been so powerful at work. My wife and I are now doing this at home, and it's really been a nice way to focus on positive, especially when it's easy to have those moments that take that away. It adds to our resilience. And as we move forward, I hope this plays correctly this time. I thought it would be a really good way to frame what we're going to talk about in this next part. And I think it actually adds to what Sharina discussed. So my hope is, as we watch this brief clip, you see aspects of how you work with your teams. And I know I've heard aspects of this in the discussions and coaching I've had with the group I'm working with.
There are 2 things that I think that great leaders need to have: empathy and perspective. And I think these things are very often forgotten. Leaders are so often so concerned about their status or their position in an organization.
Oh, I don't know what I did. Sorry about that. Let's fix that.
They actually forget their real job. And the real job of a leader is not about being in charge. It's about taking care of those in our charge. And I don't think people realize this, and I don't think people train for this. When we're junior, our only responsibility is to be good at our jobs. That's all we really have to do. And some people actually go get advanced educations so that they can be really good at their jobs, accountants or whatever, right? And you show up and you work hard, and the company will give us tons and tons of training how to do our jobs. They'll show us how to use the software. They'll send us away for a few days to get trained in whatever it is that we're doing for the company. And then they expect us to go be good at our jobs. And that's what we do. We work very hard. And if you're good at your job, they'll promote you. And at some point, you'll get promoted to a position where we're now responsible for the people who do the job we used to do, but nobody shows us how to do that. And that's why we get managers and not leaders. because the reason our managers are micromanaging us is because they actually do know how to do the job better than us. That's what got them promoted. Really, what we have to do is go through a transition. Some people make it quickly, some people make it slowly, and unfortunately, some people will never make that transition at all. Which is we have to go through this transition of being responsible for the job and then turning into somebody who's now responsible for the people who are responsible for the job. And as I said before, one of the great things that is lacking in most of our companies is that they are not teaching us how to lead. And leadership is a skill like any other. It is a practicable, learnable skill. And it is something that you work on. It's like a muscle. If you practice it all the days, you will get good at it and you will become a strong leader. If you stop practicing, you will become a weak leader. Like parenting, everyone has the capacity to be a parent. Doesn't mean everybody wants to be a parent, and doesn't mean everybody should be a parent. Leadership is the same. We all have the capacity to be a leader. Doesn't mean everybody should be a leader, and it doesn't mean everybody wants to be a leader. And the reason is because it comes at great personal sacrifice. Remember, you're not in charge, you're responsible for those in your charge. That means things like when everything goes right, you have to give away all the credit. And when everything goes wrong, you have to take all the responsibility. That sucks, right? It's things like staying late to show somebody what to do. It's things like when something does actually break, when something goes wrong, instead of yelling and screaming and taking over, you say, try again. When the overwhelming pressures are not on them, the overwhelming pressures are on us. At the end of the day, great leaders are not responsible for the job. They're responsible for the people who are responsible for the job. They're not even responsible for the results. I love talking to CEOs and say, what's your priority? And they put their hands on their hips all proudly and say, my priority is my customer. I'm like, really? You haven't talked to a customer in 15 years. There's no CEO on the planet responsible for the customer. They're just not. They're responsible for the people who are responsible for the people who are responsible for the customer.
Okay.
There are two things that I...
Let's pause. Hopefully that resonated with some folks. And I just want to say, related to this, research shows that human beings are hardwired to connect to other people. Our brains aren't fully realized unless we're part of a healthy group, and we have to be careful in how we think about our teams. There are studies that suggest prioritizing well-being reduces turnover rates, improves performance, and the culture we help create impacts how teams engage, produce, care for their own and each other's well-beings. And if we can be positive, offer open communication, constructive feedback, and foster a sense of camaraderie among team members, it will lead to higher levels of engagement, satisfaction, and commitment to the agency's goals. That positive work culture contributes to the psychological well-being of staff. It encourages self-care, work-life balance, and mutual support among team members. And this is particularly relevant for VR teams, as our responsibilities often involve addressing the needs of vulnerable populations, which is emotionally demanding. There are studies that talk about role models that suggest role models have three distinct functions: acting as examples through their behavior, representing what is possible, and being inspirational. And some of that happens by being authentic and utilizing that growth mindset that we will discuss. So I want to touch on authentic leadership because it's something really important to me. There are four components of authentic leadership: being self-aware, being transparent, balanced processing, and something called an internalized moral perspective. And I'll show you a slide in a minute that kind of explains those in more detail. There's also within the idea of authentic leadership, the ability to express yourself as you truly are. And what folks call that is being a low or high self-monitor. When I was early in my management career, I thought that being authentic meant speaking truth to power and saying what I thought someone needed to hear, no matter how hard that might be, because it wasn't my problem if it was direct communication. What I learned, and I learned the hard way, was that I was a low self-monitor. A high self-monitor is, and again, a low self-monitor tends to say whatever comes to mind. High self-monitors carefully watch what they say for that impact on others. Authentic leaders monitor their words and behaviors carefully to be attuned to their audience and to get their colleagues and teammates on board. And they do this out of a sensitivity to the impact that their words and actions have on others, not because they are messaging the right talking points. Again, it's about being present and kind and considerate. A management style where leaders are genuine, self-aware, and transparent, that is what authentic leadership is. And research shows that it serves as a strong predictor of an employee's job satisfaction, commitment, and overall workplace happiness. So to demonstrate that authenticity as a leader, you really need to know your personal values and beliefs. When displaying your strengths and weaknesses to your team, you're able to demonstrate that you're being transparent, you don't play games, you're being fair with those around you. This enables you to build the trust among your team. And if your employees make a mistake, they're going to feel more comfortable admitting their error to you. When it comes to balanced processing, according to Carissa Thacker, who wrote a great book on authentic leadership, she calls it a cognitive, behavioral, and emotional skill that allows you to look at yourself, others, and situations with a broad lens that doesn't magnify your own view or organize everyone else's view around you. So again, you want to know if what you're dealing with is a problem that needs to be solved or a dilemma that needs to be managed. One of the other things that helps with this is sometimes seeking out opposing viewpoints, which can help you see flaws in your initial course of action. It can also enable you to strengthen your argument by understanding all points of view. And it creates an environment when you're asking your staff who may disagree, it encourages them to share those opinions. And it ties back to that self-awareness where you must be cognizant of your own opinion, that it may be biased or only partially informed. The other thing about this is knowing and being clear about your values provides a foundation for leading authentically. And again, it requires you to prioritize examining our actions and regularly work with and overcome that natural self-righteousness, or I know the right thing to do, so that we can be congruent with those values as we make decisions. And the more congruent we are in our decision-making, the more staff will build trust in our decisions. So this slide is a great example of what each of those steps are. And again, it's that self-awareness, balanced processing. Here they call it the strong moral code, and then relational transparency. But it's the same 4 pieces. I just thought this was a really good additional way of explaining what authentic leadership looks like. And I also want to say I partly included this stuff because I don't believe you can talk about being accountable and accountability unless you yourself are, and you're doing so from an authentic lens. It's a really important place to be. So I want to go to mindsets, and what excites me about this stuff is a couple of things. So some people have a fixed mindset, some have a growth mindset. You can have a fixed mindset about certain things or a growth mindset about others. And what's really important is they're not static, and you can actually, like a muscle or other skills, practice and develop a growth mindset. And when it comes to delegation and offering praise, you can increase the people you work with's growth mindsets as well by how you discuss some of the tasks you may delegate. So on this, I have a couple of things that I just want to mention. And again, one thing that you can do in your work to become more authentic is try to do that through that growth mindset. But when you exhibit a growth mindset, there's greater trust, a greater sense of empowerment, ownership, and commitment from those who work for someone who exhibits that. The link I included is just a quick diagnostic tool drawn from research validated measures that will kind of tell you what your current mindset is and a little bit more about this. An easy way to think of it is if you have for those of you that have children and you've ever had to deal with a report card, you know, if you have someone who got all A's, a B, and a D, you're probably most likely going to focus on that D naturally, right? That's an area of concern. But maybe instead, and what that's going to do if you focus on that, it might lead to more of a fixed mindset. But if instead you focus on how hard the individual worked to get all of those other good grades and talk about how, let's see how we can apply that so that this can move forward and you can do better, it changes how that's thought about. And that's just one example. We'll have a few more coming up. But again, mindsets are something that can be changed. And when you focus on the effort, whether or not the outcome was what you wanted, you are increasing both their growth mindset and yours, and you are negating that fixed mindset. So if you delegate a task to someone and it doesn't go great, that's a time to make sure you slow down and utilize a growth mindset language. And again, another slide I really liked from Carol Dweck. She wrote an amazing book about mindsets that I keep here at my desk or over there on my shelf. She's the queen of this research. Great reads. And in this slide, you can just see how somebody looks at different things as both a challenge or as both fixed mindset or a growth mindset. And so, you know, someone with a fixed mindset might say, oh, this is as smart as I'll ever be. Someone with a growth mindset, I can continue to learn and develop. So someone with a fixed mindset basically has a deterministic view of the world. But if someone has a growth mindset, they can continue to achieve more and more things and will actually have a greater sense of autonomy and agency. And those things we know are really important to work satisfaction. So how do we build that? How do we be intentional when working with staff to create opportunities to challenge and grow? And I think some of that has to do with how we frame things and how we talk about stuff. So before I go further on mindsets, I did want to mention a little bit about framing. And I think we sometimes go so fast, we don't think about how we frame opportunities, challenges. It'll be important as you develop your SWOTs. And I want to touch on a couple of thinking traps that come into play. Thinking traps are patterns of thought that may lead to distorted and negative thinking. When you get involved in a thinking trap, it becomes much more difficult to make effective decisions and solve problems, and it limits the ability of your team to achieve goals. So one I talk about a lot is the idea of a fundamental attribution error, which is almost like mind reading, where you assume you know the other person's rationale for a specific behavior or conversation. Maybe you've had a staff person who is late and they've been late before, and so you immediately think this person is not invested in our team and is disrespectful. But maybe that same person is, you know, in the sandwich generation and they're getting kids off to school while at the same time making sure there's someone in the house to take care of an elderly parent, right? But we've decided that there's a reason for their behavior before really trying to understand what's happened. And when we assume we know what other folks' rationale is for a specific behavior, it's going to lead to misunderstandings, hurt feelings. It's going to actually destroy trust. Catastrophizing assumes the worst possible outcomes and leads to added anxiety and stress. Maybe when you're thinking about delegating a task, you might stop yourself because, oh, this person, our counselors are already overworked and too burdened. I can't ask them to do another thing. And so we're exhibiting a fixed mindset in that decision-making rather than thinking about, if I delegate this task and I help this individual have some range, they're going to be better able to do more, and they might do this in a better way. I am showing trust that this individual can do higher level works. It's also why I wanted to show the Simon Sinek video. That thing of, I'm just going to do this to take a burden off my staff. Sometimes we do that because we're really good at our old jobs. There are things that are so easy for me to do as opposed to the person I've hired to do that work now. It's a mistake I still make occasionally. But it's also okay for that other individual to learn and figure out their way to do the task. It definitely, I think, is why people have difficulty with delegation, because those are also tasks we're most comfortable with. Black and white thinking is really just about thinking in extremes. Again, if I give this task to someone, they're going to resign. We have a vacancy. It's too much. I included a couple examples of growth versus fixed mindset framing. And in each case, it is about learning and growing those skills for ourselves, right? I'm not a natural leader. I can't lead a team. But if instead you think to yourself, I'm willing to develop my leadership skills, that's having a growth mindset. Are you offering to take on a group project or some initiative in your agency? And equally important, are you, when you delegate or have things you want to do as a team, are you giving that opportunity to your staff in a way where you say, you may not have done this, but I'm confident in your ability to lead this work group to develop this project. And at the same time, things like, and I'll be there to help you do this, making yourself available. I'm not good at public speaking. I can't speak in front of a crowd. I may be nervous, but I'm willing to practice and improve my public speaking skills. Personally, it's an area that's still a struggle for me. I get really nervous before speaking before a group in person, even on these. I found that if I do not sit down while presenting, my legs will shake and it will cause my voice to go back and forth. You know, I've had to learn, but what I say to myself is each time I'm going to continue to practice, and over time I will get more and more comfortable. These days I tell myself, once I'm 3 or 4 minutes into the presentation, I'm going to forget I was nervous and it will go smoothly. And I've heard this before when someone's come to me about an opening in our agency. Oh, I won't get this promotion. My boss doesn't like me, or I haven't worked with this person, or they think all I do is X. And again, if you were to instead say, well, I may have to demonstrate my value to earn that promotion. I may have to do different things, but I'm capable of it. It changes how you handle things and how you think about them. And really, that's what we're talking about. How can we help our staff build their resilience, feel good about their work, and be engaged and supported? And using that growth mindset checks all of those boxes. Sharina and I did not collaborate on this piece, but that other duties as assigned, right? It's something that we joke about in our agency. You never know what's going to come from RSA, from our state, from our secretariat. What is the new thing we're going to have to work on? HR got a new time card system. We have a new email system. Someone has to be the office expert in each of these things, but those other duties as assigned really fit to delegation, accountability, and morale. And I think for for all of us as leaders and managers, you can't talk about those without also discussing active listening and mattering. So what happens if you have a team and you have 3 high performers and 1 low performer? Does adding a low performer to a high performing team raise the performance of that low performer? Studies actually show that the opposite is true, and the low performer will bring the high performers down. And I just bring that up as, sometimes we have a habit of, oh, this isn't working, I'm going to move somebody, or I'm going to bring somebody in to be that role model to show. And when we do that, I don't necessarily think we're being as transparent as we should. I think it's sometimes harder to work directly with someone who needs more coaching than it is to try to use that kind of age-old side dialogue version of, I'm going to put someone who's really good next to you. I think that's us shirking our values a bit. So I want to touch on mattering next, because it's something we are doing some work on here in Virginia, and I'm really excited about. And this comes from a book, How People Matter, by husband and wife Isaac and Ora Prilatensky. Really fascinating stuff. And according to the Prilatenskys, every human being has the desire to feel valued and to add value. And that is across 4 parts of this circle on both sides. People need to feel valued within the community, work, relationship, and self, and they need to feel able to add value to the community, work, relationships, and self. Delegation and giving the staff you work with opportunities to experience the feeling of adding value and feeling valued is huge. Studies suggest that prioritizing well-being reduces turnover rates and improves performance. Employees need to feel valued by their colleagues, and adding valued and being valued are interdependent components of mattering, and that allows for meaning making. There are crucial moments of recognition. Our presence as leaders matters. As employees, we are making a difference. The other thing with this is mattering is cyclical and can build upon itself. So if we feel like we matter, if we feel like we're adding value and we feel valued, we're going to feel good. And where we are feeling valued by others, it can also, on the other side, make us feel devalued if we aren't doing these things as leaders. So it's critical for your teams to feel appreciated, as it can lead to greater levels of self-confidence and competence. So you can ask yourself and your staff questions such as, what can I do to feel valued at work? What can I do to help others feel valued at work is something you would ask as a leader. And it's important to feel appreciated. It leads to greater levels of self-confidence and competence. When we talk about the work we do, especially in VR, we're really talking about a life spent in service to others. That service to others without feeling appreciation and experience appreciation is unsustainable. And I think that is partly what contributes to some of our turnover issues. The satisfaction of knowing that our staff's work and actions positively impacts the clients that they serve or the team they work with gives our work a greater sense of meaning. And that's really important, because if we have that greater sense of meaning, we're going to feel connected to our job so that maybe we're not looking to leave, right? Sharina also touched on something. She said micro moments. And she's really hit the nail on the head. Some of the things we can do as leaders takes seconds. And I'm going to talk about that now through some work around what's called high quality connections. These are short-term positive interactions at work that foster positive outcomes for both individual employees and organizations. Much of this work has been done by Jane Dutton at the University of Michigan, and she's written a few books. I should have put those in my notes. But studies show that even 30-second interactions increase resilience. part of what she would say is it's our whole body that comes to work, not just our brains. And why should we care? Well, when we care about these things, it makes us physiological stronger in the moment. So high quality connections affect our hearts, our hormones, and our breathings, not just during, but after that high quality connection. Her research says that the more of these high quality connections and experiences, the longer individuals live. They make us more creative. They allow us to think more broadly. They're uplifting. It can build up resources such as confidence and trust that can carry over into future interactions. Additionally, with those high quality connections we create in a team, it leads to a greater level of psychological safety. Teams become more adaptive, cooperative, and more trusting. We focus so much on negative interactions, and I think make the mistake of taking for granted those positive interactions, right? Much like focusing on a child's D grade, we're going to focus on the things we need to fix and not as much focus on what went well and why it went well. So part of why high quality connections really affect individual and the team's performance, they improve individual functioning, actually have been shown to increase cognitive processing speeds, memory. They facilitate individual employees' recovery from challenges and adaptation to change. It enables the individuals to develop and grow and form attachments to their organization. So again, if we're creating high quality connections, it's actually increasing our staff's attachment to our agency. It also creates moments of learning and mutual inquiry. I mentioned it fosters that psychological safety and trust, which again contributes to a greater team level learning from failures. And it's almost like a snowball, right? It creates increasing cooperation and more trust across the organization. It also improves the processes on the team. There was a 2018 Gallup article that talked about having a best friend at work, and they said that having a best friend at work can lead to better performance, and that 6 out of 10 employees strongly agreed that they have a best friend at work. It led to 36% less safety incidents, more engaged customers, and actually higher profit margins. There's another article that mentioned that 36% of employees say they look forward to going to work when they work with a friend, and 31% of employees feel stronger and more valued. Again, high quality connections and these micro moments can actually create these opportunities to build this within a team. So studies suggest using a few fundamental values when seeking to energize work environments through those high quality connections. Teamwork, that idea of collective responsibility and action directed towards learning while supporting each other, which again, how we delegate, how we talk about those things in a team meeting. Professional development, personal growth, that whole person approach, honoring life, having conversations about more than the work. Interesting, both Veronica and I were on a little bit early. We just had a conversation. We weren't talking about the work. We were just catching up. Those small minutes mean so much to how we function as a group. And I think it's important to make sure you're present, available, and create the time to do that. And it can be something, again, that takes time, that you have to practice. And again, respect and dignity. So what's on the slide is some of the things you might want to ask that will help you with that. And we're gonna talk a little more about that, but I'm really excited about this idea and how we can use these small moments to really shift how we feel valued and how we're allowing our staff to feel valued and add value. So here are a few more just those interactions that build a safe place for expressing both positive and negative. So closing a case successfully is a positive. Maybe you might feel frustrated when a client decides to quit a job. And again, according to Dutton, who I mentioned earlier, those high quality connections can be fostered through that what went well exercise. On any one day, one person can lift up other folks on the team. Which leads to a little bit about positive recognition. I think that's really important. And I loved that Sharina discussed performance evals and when we talk to someone about recognition. What you'll see here is kind of the life cycle for an employee and when they get recognition. But what you'll see on the right is that idea of ongoing feedback and recognition that reinforces development and performance. So I'm not going to go all through these, but again, ask someone how they want to be recognized. Thank someone as close to when someone did something really nice, or especially when using growth language, when someone stepped out of their comfort zone to do something, whether it worked great and was perfect, or there was more work to do, say something around how you appreciate the effort to work on this difficult task. Again, connect the dots. Recognition is usually more effective when given in context. So when you can point to how the person's effort or behavior demonstrates the agency values or achieves a bigger goal, that is really helpful. Be authentic. That's big to me. When you're gonna thank someone, mean it. It's clear when you're just doing something you think you should. And then I also want to say appropriateness, right? Undeserved or overpraising can be perceived as fake and inauthentic and lead to mistrust. Delegation. It really is a difficult thing for a lot of us to do. And according to the Harvard Business Review, delegation refers to the transfer of responsibility for specific tasks from one person to another. It is really important work and frees up time to focus on higher value activities while maintaining employee engagement and autonomy. According to a different Gallup study, CEOs who excel in delegating generate greater revenue. We know we can't do everything on our plate, but when we create opportunities to give tasks to our staff, it is creating confidence in them, it's empowering, it boosts morale, and again, improves productivity, but also in your roles, it frees up time to focus on other activities that are really important. So here's a list of several things. I want to say not every task can be delegated. You're not going to delegate performance reviews or dealing with personnel issues. People on your team have strengths. See what people want to work on. Tasks that you delegate should be framed within the appropriate context and within the agency goals. Provide the resources, right? Does the person you're delegating something to need to be trained on the task? Do they need a specific resource or authority to be successful? If they do, as a manager, it's your job to make sure the employee has those things. And I think sometimes we are uncomfortable delegating, maybe because we haven't done that step first, but it's an important one. Is your communication with that person clear? Do they feel comfortable asking you if they have questions, right? How are you going to check in? Allow for failure is really important. Part of growth is making mistakes. And not because you don't trust your staff or think they'll fail, but it allows for experimentation. And sometimes someone may want to do something differently than you've done it in the past, and it's going to turn out to be great. And patience is really important. Sometimes, as I said earlier, we avoid delegating because I can do this quicker and it's going to take someone else twice as long. But at some point, it took you twice as long to do that task that you can now do with your eyes closed. Besides monitoring the progress of a task, you really need to prepare to deliver feedback as well once it's completed. And again, if something didn't get completed the way you'd hope, constructive criticism is important. You're not chastising the people that work for you. That's creating the opportunity for them to make changes next time. So if a task doesn't go as planned, really frame how you're going to discuss that and ask for feedback on how you delegated the task. Be open to the thought that maybe you didn't leave as much detail or there was something you could have done differently. So when a task doesn't go well that I've delegated or a group, I always start with, hey, let's debrief this. And I want to start with what I could have done differently. And why do you think we didn't get where we should have? And then again, if it goes great, make sure you give credit to the folks who participated. And do that publicly and with those above you as well. Delegation is also part of succession planning. If people don't have the chance to stretch, they might not think to at later points in time. Accountability is how you reward and encourage behaviors and outcomes needed for success. There are kind of 4 steps in how you define, in how you look at accountability. What is the expectation? Everyone's responsible for meeting deadlines. Everyone should show up to work on time. Communication is critical. One of the things I do is a lot around kind of mapping out what some deadlines would be and then measure, checking in. So to stay on track, I might say, here are all the key deadlines and I'd like everyone to meet this point at this date. If we're not there, we'll figure out what we need to do differently. But also when we get to those outcomes and follow through, hey, I noticed that extra work you did to make sure we met the deadlines. This is going to help our whole team stay on track. Make sure you thank that person in the moment and with those kind of framing, because it helps people think about the bigger picture. On the other side, if something's not going well, hey, it seems that I've noticed you've been distracted lately. And that's delaying the rest of the project. What can we do to move forward? How can I help so that we can catch up and not miss future deadlines? Then I go back with accountability and think, if a behavior isn't improving, the consequence increases over time, right? So, you hope it doesn't go in that direction, but much like with things we do with RSA and reports and those, we have to provide feedback and document that we've been providing feedback. Accountability starts with you as a manager. You can't expect others to meet an expectation that you haven't set first. So have you set that expectation appropriately? Have you defined it? Have you then had discussions? Have you given someone more than just verbal, hey, what's going on here? And always start there. But if something isn't going well and I end up having a long verbal discussion about a staff's performance, I set a meeting for the next week with that person and say, I'd like to talk again next week at this same time to see how we can work on this together. And I'd like to see what steps you take in this next week. And I will then document that conversation, not the first one, only because I really try to focus on positive. And often, life happens. Something came up and someone had to balance multiple things, or maybe there was something really important on someone's caseload that seemed to deserve a higher priority than other items. So what does accountability look like at work? That's some basic things, right? Are you honest? Do you communicate effectively? Are you on time? Those are basics, right? But to me, accountability also includes being proactive. Don't wait for someone else to take ownership. Figure out ways to solve problems and seek solutions. And again, I think the more you develop a growth mindset in your staff, you will see some of these other pieces. The more you focus on authentic leadership, the more you'll see staff be vulnerable, where people admit their errors instead of cover up mistakes. They'll ask for help instead of trying to hide something wrong because they feel responsible for their own success. You know, employees will communicate more because you're authentic and honest. They're going to feel that they trust you, and it's going to maintain and grow that relationship. And by doing those things, you're increasing morale, right? Morale is often highly dependent on employees' effectiveness, health, comfort, and belief in purpose. It's the capacity of a group of people to pull together persistently and consistently in pursuit of a common purpose. I love that quote because it's a consistent pursuit. You know, we talk a lot about rapid engagement. I try to talk about rapid and continuous engagement on our teams. It's not about just doing something quickly at the beginning, those check-ins, much like we looked at the chart relative to feedback and praise. You don't do it at these just high moments once every 4 or 6 months, but regular opportunities. And again, morale can be seen in increased optimism, self-esteem, greater confidence, team spirit, hope, determination. These are all aspects of morale. And when it comes to morale, I just want to say that, yes, we need to focus on those tools and systems and work-life balance. To me, the tools we are focused on my team right now are how do we use some of the tenets of positive psychology and the idea of high-quality connections within our team. But leadership, much like the Sinek video, is one of the most critical contributors to morale. The right person in a leadership role will build the team and make folks feel excited about their work. And I think it's more important than any technology or perks you have in place. Think of a VR counselor spending most of their time entering data rather than providing counseling services. When staff spend time on unfulfilling tasks or in positions they aren't suited to, it adversely affects morale, and it's difficult to be in a position without growth. And that's where we need to look at the type of work. Sharina touched on professional development, and again, it's so critical. That professional development helps your staff with needed resources, not just for growth and mastery, but it helps build those individual self-concept and self-esteem. And then when it comes to culture, you can be intentional about creating that culture of mattering that is supportive of each other. If your team isn't supportive or struggling to collaborate, morale is going to be low. And that's more than just team building activities. I really believe people need to understand the big picture and common goals of the agency to make decisions that are going to grow that culture and get to those outcomes we're all looking for. According to Forbes, employees who feel like their voices is being heard are almost 5 times more likely to be empowered and perform their best work. The article goes as far as to say that employees expect communications to be a two-way street. So if you want to increase your team's morale, a few things you can do to focus on this area specifically. Pay attention to kind of how morale is. Are people feeling downtrodden? Are folks complaining a lot? Focus on and improve your internal communication. Are you making sure you're sharing the why? Are you celebrating those little accomplishments? Are you having opportunities for high quality connections? Are you prioritizing and creating the space for team building? I feel like you can't talk about this stuff without just mentioning active listening. And most of us on this have been in the counselor role. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but again, I want to say active listening is as important in a management or leadership role, and almost more important than an individual client, because in your role now and working with multiple staff, that active listening demonstrates and models the behavior that you want those staff to have with their clients, but it is also going to allow those staff to feel heard, validated, and increase high quality connections. We were going to look at doing an exercise, and this is another tool I've used with my team. We're not going to have time, but I want to share what we've done with this. There are times with our team, if we're meeting via Zoom, I'll put a few breakout rooms together and I'll ask each person to speak for 2 minutes straight, and the other, I have an even number of team people, and the other person will just listen, and then they switch. And then I'll bring folks back with the goal of you listen openly without judgment, and I'll ask these questions. Hey, when you were speaking, what did you notice? When you were listening, what did you notice? And then I try to bring it back to the connection, right? How did this exercise impact your connection to the others in the group? And we got that from some work we're doing with the University of Pennsylvania, their Master's in Applied Positive Psychology. They've been working with myself and some of my staff on a roadmap for resilience based on, again, the Prilatensky's work and the Dutton work around high quality connections and mattering. I'm really excited because, again, we don't have the place for me to just give everyone a raise. And that's not really the end all be all of being connected at work. Another activity that I think is really important, and we don't have full time to do this, but I've included a link to a great piece. Has anyone seen the 5-finger breathing exercise? It's really powerful and works. If I know I'm about to have a high stakes conversation or meeting, I'll sometimes sit, if I'm driving to it, I'll sit in my car and do this 2 or 3 times. I'll do this, quietly before, if I have to go speak to like our commissioner, or if I have to go speak to a different state agency's commissioner, or sometimes a delegate, I always do this. What's really cool about it is when you are breathing in and breathing out and tracing your finger, it is an exercise you can do on your own hand or do with a chart like this. But by adding that element of touch, it's really shifting your brain a bit and allowing you to calm and focus and feel centered. I highly recommend this. It is a very calming exercise. And again, if I know I haven't been listening as well as I want, or I feel like I missed something, I really try to center and reset myself. And again, nobody is perfect. We all have to work on this. So that is the 5-finger breathing. Again, the video is a doctor who, again, I think this video is around COVID. I also included something called the PERMA exercise, and it's a questionnaire from, again, UPenn. Really cool exercise, and it's a way to work with someone on your team around what matters to them. And I'm sorry I rushed through this. I would have loved to have built in a little more time to discuss, but I'm going to close it there. Say thank you. If folks have questions or want to put something in the chat. And again, I just want to say that I'm thankful for everyone's attention. I know this was a lot of information today. I'm going to turn it over to Robin and think about ways you can have small moments to build your teams, because they will pay great dividends. And thank you.
Thank you, David. Any questions for David, or any questions from Sharina's presentation? There were some great resources that David shared. David, really appreciate the presentation that you and Sharina have brought to us today. Great information, lots of information. I encourage you to use the exercise and activities, the discussion questions that David has shared and Sharina has shared in her presentation. Is it University of Pennsylvania, the Authentic Happiness Questionnaire Center has some great tests in there that you can use to have discussions with your colleague, your staff as well. So again, if we're talking about retention and recruitment, retention, motivation, morale in the workplace, you have some really wonderful tools and resources at your disposal through this presentation. Real quickly, I'll share my screen for our homework for this session on management, conflict, productivity, and performance. We are going to ask you to think about what you've learned today in this presentation and take those tools and resources and look within your organization or maybe even outside your organization for a person who would be a potential mentor for you in your leadership journey, and ask for an hour of their time, maybe 90 minutes of their time over coffee, over Zoom, or maybe in their office, to ask them some questions about their leadership journey. And on the handout or the assignment I'll send to you, there are some potential interview questions that you can include in your discussion, which center around risk-taking, disappointment, failure, their vision for their career, what they thought they were going to be, where they thought they would be 5 years ago based on where they are today compared to where they are today. Maybe even adding in some few questions about their communication style or how they address conflict in the workplace or negotiation, as we've shared in discussions today. And then have that interview and then take time to reflect upon it, write up your findings from that. If you can get that done by the middle of the next month, that would be awesome, June 16th. And then also to continue to work with your SWOT, continue to work with your small group on your SWOT for your organization or organizations. If you have an opportunity to meet with your accountability partner, sharing with that individual or those individuals the findings from your interview would be the theme of that meeting. Any questions? Again, you're interviewing a potential mentor. That could be a person in your organization, or if you don't want to inundate, if more than one of you are in the same organization like Tennessee, Delaware, or Louisiana or Oklahoma, you might want to think outside your organization, a potential mentor, an exemplary leader that you've identified that you want to just pick their brain and just have a conversation with over coffee or tea, and talk with them talk through those questions or come up with your own questions to help you on your leadership journey, especially around this topic of productivity, conflict, performance management. Any questions on that assignment? All right, we'll be processing this video, this recording from today. We'll get it loaded up and sent out to you so you'll have it as a reference point. And we will be back next month on June the 27th for our discussion on small group management communication with Veronica Jackson and Director Daisha Johnson from Oregon Blind. We're looking forward to that discussion. I think some of you may also be doing some small group coaching sessions over the next month or so. So you'll be hearing from your faculty leader for that as well. If you have any questions, need support, please reach out to me or your faculty leader at any time. And we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you.